why meditation isn't what you think. Buddhism makes a specific claim. There is a form of seeing, direct, not conceptual, not cognitive, that liberates the mind from conditioned suffering, not knowing about impermanence, not believing in not-self, seeing these things moment by moment as they arise and pass away. Tonight, what that seeing is, and why it is different from simply being calm. Because if you've ever meditated, you've felt calm. This is the other thing. The Buddhist tradition has two words for these two things. It calls calm samatha. It calls insight vipassana. And the relationship between them, how they combine, whether one requires the other, which one liberates, has been debated inside the tradition for more than 2,000 years. That debate is still open. Two of the most respected translators of the Pali Canon working today, Bhikkhu Bodhi and Thanissaro Bhikkhu, disagree about it. They disagree in print, they disagree in scholarly exchange, and they disagree while reading the same texts. Tonight is not a video that will resolve that debate. No video can. What tonight will do is show you the shape of the two practices, place them side by side, and let you see where the canonical texts are clear, where the commentarial tradition has extended them, and where the modern meditation movement, the one that shaped almost every retreat center in the West, has taken the material somewhere the canon does not quite go. If you have ever sat on a cushion and tried to quiet your mind, this concerns you. If you have ever sat a Goenka retreat, or attended IMS, or learned to note rising, falling, this concerns you especially, because what you are doing has a name, has a history, and has a canonical status that is more contested than most teachers say. Let us begin where almost everyone begins. Chapter 1. Most people who meditate are doing samatha, or something that developed out of samatha, or something built on the platform samatha creates. This is not a criticism. It is a description of the landscape. The word samatha is often translated as tranquility, calm, or serenity. Its literal sense in Pali is something closer to stilling, the settling of what has been agitated, the coming to rest of what has been moving. When you close your eyes and follow the breath, and the breath gradually lengthens, and the shoulders drop, and the buzzing thought stream begins to loosen, that settling is samatha in its early, accessible form. It is a real thing. It is a valuable thing. Almost every mature spiritual tradition has some version of it, because almost every human being has occasionally noticed that the mind is loud and wondered whether it could be quieter. Buddhism developed samatha with unusual technical precision. The tradition mapped the deepening of stillness into stages called the jhānas, 4 progressive absorptions of increasing subtlety. The Samanñāphala Sutta, DN2, describes them in a formula that becomes the standard across the Pali Canon. In the first jhana, the meditator withdraws from sensory input and enters a state characterized by directed thought, evaluation, rapture, piti, pleasure, sukha, and one-pointedness of mind. In the second jhana, directed thought and evaluation fall away, leaving rapture, pleasure, and inner stillness. In the third, rapture subsides, and there remains a refined pleasure and equanimity. In the fourth, even pleasure is set aside, and what remains is a purity of mindfulness in equanimity, a state the texts describe as neither pleasant nor painful. That is the samatha ladder in its canonical form. Beyond the fourth jhana, the tradition maps 4 further formless attainments: the base of infinite space, of infinite consciousness, of nothingness, and of neither perception nor non-perception. together with the jhanas. These are the 8 samapatti, the 8 attainments. And parallel to them, the tradition maps another set of samatha practices, the 4 brahmavihāra, the divine abidings of loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity, each of which can be developed to the depth of an absorption. The Atthakkanagara Sutta, M.N. 52, spoken not by the Buddha himself, but by the Venerable Ānanda to a householder named Asama in the town of Atthakkanagara, lists 11 of these attainments as doors to the deathless, 4 jhanas, 4 brahmavihāra absorptions, 3 formless attainments, 11 doors, all samatha. And here is a detail we will return to. Every one of them, in Ānanda's account, requires samādhi, concentration. Not one is described as a bare cognitive exercise. Now, a crucial point that the tradition itself makes plain, and that many modern presentations obscure. The jhanas are not liberation. They are what the canon calls ditta dhamma sukha vihara, pleasant abidings in the here and now, in cosmological terms, which is to say, in the terms the tradition uses to describe where consciousness ends up after death. Samatha practice culminating in the jhanas produces rebirth in the Brahma realms. This came up in one of our earlier videos in this catalogue. The Brahma realms are refined, subtle, extraordinarily long-lived, and characterized by profound stillness. They are also, and this is the point, still inside samsara. Beings there eventually exhaust the karma that placed them there, and they fall back into rebirth in less refined states. The Brahma realms are a pleasant vacation. They are not the way out. This is the first thing that must be said clearly, because the modern conflation of meditation with liberation often runs precisely through this gap. Deep calm is not awakening. Deep concentration is not awakening. The mind resting in the 4th jhana, extraordinarily rare, extraordinarily refined, is not awakened. It is simply, for the moment, very still. The lamp exists. The lamp is beautiful. The lamp alone does not illuminate. For that, something else is needed. And it is at this point that we have to slow down and pay attention to the historical landscape of contemporary meditation practice. Because most of what a Western practitioner has been taught was developed under a specific set of pressures in a specific time and place, and it changed the way the tradition transmits its own methods. Consider what happened in Burma in the late 19th and early 20th century. British colonial rule had disrupted the traditional Buddhist institutions of the country. The monastic sponsorship system that had supported deep contemplative training for centuries was fraying, and a Burmese monk named Ledi Sayadaw, born in 1846, dying in 1923, took a radical step. He began teaching insight meditation to lay people, not to monastics with decades of jhana training, to ordinary Burmese householders, workers, farmers. He argued that a lay practitioner did not need the deep jhanas, that a lighter form of concentration, which the tradition calls khanika samādhi, or momentary concentration, would be sufficient to support insight practice. The scholar Eric Braun documents this transition carefully in his book, The Birth of Insight, published by the University of Chicago Press in 2013. Ledi's method, Braun writes, could be found in the canonical texts, but in the past it had been considered less than ideal, and it was little taught. Ledi's move was consequential. It democratized meditation. It said, "You do not need to be a forest monk with 20 years of jhana, attainment to practice the path. You can practice now, in your ordinary life, with the ordinary concentration you can develop in a lay setting. And whether or not this move was faithful to the canonical texts, this is precisely the debate we are heading into. It worked, in the sense that it produced practitioners, communities, teachers, and results that transformed Buddhism in Burma and eventually far beyond it. Ledi's approach was extended in the 20th century by Mahasi Sayadaw, born in 1904, dying in 1982, who developed the technique of continuous mental noting. If you have ever been taught to sit with the breath and quietly label, rising, falling, or to note distractions as they arise, thinking, hearing, planning, you have inherited Mahasi's method. The technique is designed to develop momentary concentration continuously across changing objects of experience, rather than the sustained concentration on a single object that produces the jhānas. A parallel Burmese lineage, Uba Khin, who died in 1971, and his most famous student S.N. Goenka, who died in 2013, developed a different technique based on systematic body scanning. In a Goenka retreat, the meditator moves attention through the body in a slow, methodical sweep, observing the arising and passing of physical sensations. As of the current period, Goenka retreats are offered at more than 390 centers worldwide. 10 days, silent, free of charge, sustained by donations from former students. Millions of people have sat these retreats. Many of them, if they are watching this video, are watching it because they have. And then, in the 1970s, this Burmese lineage came to America. In 1975, 4 young Americans, Joseph Goldstein, Jack Kornfield, Sharon Salzberg, and Jacqueline Schwartz, who had trained in Asia in the Mahasi lineage and adjacent traditions, founded the Insight Meditation Society. Its retreat center in Barre, Massachusetts, opened its doors on February 14, 1976. A decade later, in 1986, Jack Kornfield co-founded Spirit Rock Meditation Center in Woodacre, California. These 2 centers, and the network that grew around them, became the primary infrastructure through which Buddhist meditation entered the American mainstream. If you have sat at IMS or Spirit Rock, or taken a class from a teacher trained at either, or read a book by Goldstein or Salzberg or Kornfield, you are inside this lineage, and the technique that lineage transmits, the noting method, the body scan, the emphasis on momentary concentration rather than sustained jhana, is Mahasi derived, Ledi descended, and canonically contested. Not wrong, not fake, not invalid, contested. There is a genuine, unresolved scholarly and doctrinal question about how these modern lay-oriented methods relate to what the canonical texts describe. That question is what this video is about. Now let us go to the canon itself, because the canon does not leave us empty-handed. In the Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha lays out a scheme that is remarkably practical, and that gives the entire tradition a framework for thinking about the relationship between calm and insight. The Samādhi Sutta, AN 4.94, describes 4 types of person. The first type has attained inner tranquility of awareness, what the sutta calls Seto Samatha, but not insight into phenomena through heightened discernment. This person has Samatha but lacks Vipassana. The second type has attained insight into phenomena but not inner tranquility. This person has Vipassana but lacks Samatha. The third type has neither. The fourth type has both. The advice the sutta gives is not doctrinal, it is practical. The person with tranquility but no insight, the sutta says, should go to one who has attained insight and ask, how should phenomena be regarded? How should they be investigated? How should they be seen with insight? Then, having received that instruction, he should develop insight for himself. Conversely, the person with insight but no tranquility should go to one who has attained tranquility and ask how the mind should be steadied, unified, concentrated. And the person with neither should make a great effort to develop both. This is one of the most level-headed passages in the canon on this question. It does not tell you which comes first. It does not tell you one is sufficient without the other. It tells you, look at what you have, look at what you lack, and go to a teacher who can supply what is missing. Develop both, and then, having laid out those 4 types, we can ask the deeper question, what is the both that the sutta is pointing toward? What is vipassana exactly? What does it mean to see with insight in the sense the tradition intends? Because if samatha is the still lamp, beautiful, valuable, insufficient, then what is the light the tradition is asking us to look for? That is the subject of Chapter 2. Chapter 2. Vipassana. The word is often translated as insight, but the literal Pali is more precise. Vi is an intensifying prefix meaning clearly, distinctly, in a way that separates and distinguishes. Passana is from the verb passati, to see. So vipassana is not insight in the sense of having a clever idea about. It is closer to clear seeing, distinct seeing, seeing in a way that discriminates one thing from another, what is being seen. The tradition names 3 characteristics: the tilakkhana, impermanence, anicca, unsatisfactoriness, dukkha, not self, anatta. Every phenomenon that arises inside experience, the tradition claims, exhibits these 3. Every thought, every sensation, every perception, every feeling, every act of consciousness, arising and passing, unable to satisfy, not owned by any self. If you have been following this catalogue, these 3 words are not new. They have been threading through every video we have made. What is new, what Chapter 2 is asking you to hold, is a subtle but decisive shift. Vipassana is not knowing these things. It is not agreeing with them. It is not having them explained well and thinking, yes, that makes sense. A vipassana is seeing them, moment by moment, in the actual arising and passing of experience, before conceptual thought closes down around the arising and packages it into a name. In an earlier video, we found that saññā, perception, is a mirage, a constructed pattern match that the mind runs so quickly you never see the construction happen. You see the finished product, cup, chair, person, and mistake the finished product for the raw material. Vipassana is what it looks like to catch the mirage in the act, not to think about the mirage, to watch the flicker where perception is putting itself together, and to see that flicker as impermanent, unsatisfactory, not self in the same instant it arises. In another earlier video, we made the case that Satipatthana, the 4 establishings of mindfulness, is not the same as the modern MBSR-style mindfulness that is taught in hospitals and corporate wellness programs. Chapter 2 is where we say why. The formula in the Satipatthana Sutta, MN10, is not notice sensations non-judgmentally. It is more surgical than that. The formula says, one remains focused on the phenomenon of origination with regard to the body. Origination, samudaya dhamma. On the phenomenon of passing away, or on the phenomenon of origination and passing away. Thanissaro Bhikkhu emphasizes in his commentary on this passage that origination here means how phenomena arise in connection with causes, not a bare cinematographic frame-by-frame observation, but a discernment of the conditioned nature of what arises. that discernment, that seeing in connection with causes, is vipassana. And in a still earlier video, we described how the body carries conditioning, sankhara, beneath conscious awareness, how feeling tone, vedana, arises from that conditioning before any narrative catches up, and how there is a practice, vedananupassana, of watching vedana itself at its point of arising, in order to see the conditioning become visible before the automatic reactive chain completes. That practice, if we now give it its systematic name, is vipassana. It is what the tradition has been pointing to across the whole catalogue. Tonight is where we finally name it. Now, this is the point where the canonical debate arrives, because once we have named vipassana, the next question is inevitable. What is its relationship to samatha? Can you have one without the other? Which comes first? Which liberates? And here we have to be careful, because two of the most careful readers of the Pali Canon working today have looked at this question, read the same text, and reached different conclusions. Thanissaro Bhikkhu, a monk in the Thai forest tradition, the abbot of Metta Forest Monastery in California, the translator whose work is at dhammatalks.org, has been arguing for many years that the received modern picture of these two practices is not what the canon actually says. His position, stated in a long essay called One Tool Among Many, and elaborated across his book Right Mindfulness, is unambiguous. If you look directly at the Pali discourses, he writes, although the texts do use the word samatha to mean tranquility and vipassana to mean clear seeing, they otherwise confirm none of the received wisdom about these terms. The canon, on his reading, does not present samatha and vipassana as two separate methods that can be pursued independently. It presents them as two dimensions of a single unified practice. And the practice the canon consistently points to is the practice of jhana. His central textual anchor is the Buddha's own awakening account in the Mahāsakaka Sutta, MN36. The Buddha, on the night of his awakening, does not develop vipassana first. He enters the first jhana, then the second, then the third, then the fourth, and only from the platform of the fourth jhana, from that concentrated, still, equanimous mind, does he direct his awareness toward the three knowledges that constitute his liberation. Recollection of past lives, the divine eye that sees the arising and passing of beings according to karma, the knowledge of the destruction of the taints, jhana first, then insight, applied from the platform of jhana. Thanissaro also points to the Dhammapada, DHP 372, 4 lines. There's no jhana for one with no discernment for one without jhana, but one with both jhana and discernment. He's on the verge of unbinding. One line, half of the canonical verse, makes jhana a necessary condition for discernment. That is the core of his reading. His further evidence, MN52, which we mentioned in chapter 1. Ānanda's list of 11 doors to the deathless, every one of which requires samādhi. If these are the only doors Ānanda knows of, and all of them require concentration, that is significant data for Thanissaro's reading, and it is worth pausing on the technical claim inside his position, because it is easy to miss. Thanissaro is not claiming that jhana and vipassana are two separate practices where you do jhana first and then vipassana second. He's claiming that the correct practice of satipatthana, of the 4 establishings of mindfulness, is itself the practice of the first jhana, and that as satipatthana deepens, the concentration deepens through all the jhanas. Samatha and vipassana, on his reading, are not two things. They are two aspects, two dimensions of the same activity. When you develop mindfulness rightly, you develop concentration. When you develop concentration rightly, insight naturally arises within it, the received modern picture, where you can do dry insight without concentration, is, in his view, not what the canonical texts describe. Now, Bhikkhu Bodhi. Bhikkhu Bodhi is, if anything, an even more senior translator. Born in New York, trained in Sri Lanka, the former editor of the Buddhist Publication Society, the translator whose complete translations of the Majjhima, Samyutta, and Anguttara Nikayas, together with Nyanamoli Bhikkhu's foundational work, form the standard scholarly reference for the Pali discourses in English. When Bhikkhu Bodhi reads these same texts, he reaches a different conclusion. Bodhi agrees with Thanissaro on one crucial point that we have to state clearly, because it is often obscured. The explicit term Sukhavipassaka, the dry insight meditator, the practitioner who allegedly attains awakening without ever entering jhana, appears in the Pali Canon 0 times. It is a term from the commentarial literature, from the Visuddhimagga, chapters 18, 21, and 23, compiled by Buddhaghosa in Sri Lanka, around the year 430 of the Common Era. When you hear a modern teacher say, some people attain awakening through dry insight alone, they are drawing on Buddhaghosa. They are not quoting the Nikayas. Both Bodhi and Thanissaro agree on this. This is not the disputed part. The disputed part is what the canonical silence means. Thanissaro reads the silence one way. The canon does not name Sukhavipassaka, because Sukhavipassaka is not a real category. The canon consistently points to jhana. Bodhi reads the same silence differently. He argues that the canonical texts leave the door open. They do not explicitly deny Sukhavipassaka. They do not systematically require jhana in every account of awakening. And there are certain suttas that, on his reading, hint by silence that jhana may not be indispensable for every path to liberation. His primary textual anchor is the Yuganada Sutta, A.N. 4.170, from the Anguttara Nikaya. And here we have to pause for an attribution note that matters. The Yuganada Sutta is spoken not by the Buddha, but by the Venerable Ānanda, the same Ānanda who spoke MN 52. This time to a gathering of monks at Gosita's monastery in Kosamba. So when we quote this sutta, we quote Ānanda. What Ānanda says is that there are 4 ways liberation can be attained. 1. A monk develops insight preceded by tranquility. 2. A monk develops tranquility preceded by insight. 3. A monk develops tranquility and insight in tandem. 4. A monk's mind is seized by restlessness concerning the Dhamma, and the path is born from within that restlessness itself. 4 paths, 4 sequences, all leading to the same fruit. On Bodhi's reading, the second path, the tranquility preceded by insight path, is decisive. It shows that the canon acknowledges practitioners who develop insight before they develop deep concentration. And if that is a legitimate canonical path, then Thanissaro's claim that jhana must come first is too strong. Now, and this is where the debate becomes philosophically interesting, Thanissaro has a response. He points out carefully that the Yuganada Sutta does not say liberation occurs through vipassana without samatha. In every one of Ānanda's 4 paths, both qualities are present. In path 2, insight comes first, but tranquility follows. It is not absent, it is not skipped. It is developed after the initial insight opens the way. The variable in Thanissaro's reading of this sutta is not the presence or absence of the 2 qualities. Both are always present. The variable is the sequence and the emphasis. Both readings of the Yuganada Sutta are, on their own terms, defensible. Bodhi reads Path 2 as showing that the canon acknowledges a genuinely insight-led path. Thanissaro reads Path 2 as showing that even the insight-led path requires tranquility to complete. The sutta itself does not resolve which reading is correct, because both are compatible with what Ānanda actually says. There is another sutta, the Susama Sutta, SN 12.70, that Bodhi has cited in similar contexts. It describes a group of arahants who report that they lack the super knowledges, that they have not attained the higher jhanas leading to psychic powers. Bodhi has read this as evidence that the canon acknowledges awakened practitioners who reach liberation without the deep samapatti attainments. Thanissaro has responded that the sutta's silence about jhana is not the same as an explicit statement that these arahants lacked jhana. They may have had jhana without having pursued the psychic power attainments beyond it. The sutta does not settle the question because it does not directly address the question. This is the shape of the debate. Two careful readers, two coherent readings, the same text, and a canonical corpus that, read honestly, does not definitively resolve which reader is right. What the canon does clearly say, and this is where Bodhi and Thanissaro agree completely, is that both qualities are necessary in some relationship for awakening. Neither position is that you can awaken through calm alone. Neither position is that you can awaken through cognitive understanding alone. The disagreement is about the sequence, the emphasis, and the degree of concentration required. Both sides of the debate agree that if you have only samatha, you have not yet arrived. Both sides agree that if you have only conceptual understanding of impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and not self, that is not vipassana either. Both are agreed on that. The rest is scholarly interpretation of texts that, honestly read, admit of both interpretations. Now, this video is not going to declare a winner. There is no winner to declare. Two of the most respected translators of the canon disagree. They have been in scholarly dialogue with each other, and they have reached opposing conclusions from the same textual base. That fact, the fact that the texts admit of both readings, is itself the important thing to notice. It means the canon leaves practitioners with a question that has to be resolved not in the library, but on the cushion. Which of these two readings is right for your practice, right now, given the mind you have and the conditions you are in? That is a question no scholar can answer for you, but the canon does give us an image, not a lamp and light image, which comes from a later tradition we will note in a moment, but a canonical image of the two working together. It is one of the most beautiful similes in the Pali Canon, and it is often overlooked. The Kimsaka Sutta, SN 35.204 in Thanissaro's numbering, SN 35.245 in Bodhi's. The numbering differs across editions because the Samyutta Nikaya has been divided differently by different translators, but it is the same sutta, presents an extended parable. Imagine a royal frontier fortress. The fortress has 6 gates. Inside the fortress is a commander who governs. To that commander, from the outside, come a swift pair of messengers, carrying an accurate report. They enter through the appropriate gate. They deliver the report to the commander. They turn and go back the way they came. On this parable rests one of the canon's clearest statements about samatha and vipassana. The Buddha explains the parable. The fortress is the body. The 6 gates are the 6 senses. The commander of the fortress is consciousness. And the swift pair of messengers, this is the phrase. The swift pair of messengers stands for tranquility and insight. They travel together. They arrive together. They deliver their report to the commander, an accurate report of what is actually the case at the senses. And they return together. Samatha and vipassana in the canon's own image, are not one before the other. They are a pair, swift, together, delivering the same report. There is a parallel image in the Samyutta Nikaya at SN 43.2, where serenity and insight together are named as the path to the unconditioned, to Nibbana. Again, the pairing is explicit, not one or the other, both together. Now, the lamp and light image that many of us have heard. Where does that come from? It comes from a text called the Platform Sutra of the Sixth Patriarch, the record of the teachings of Huineng, a Chan master from the 7th century of the Common Era in China, not from the Pali Nikayas, not from the earliest tradition. It is a beautiful image, and it has become one of the standard ways of describing the Samatha vipassana relationship in the West, largely through the Zen tradition and Zen-adjacent teachers. But if you want to know what the canonical Buddhist image is, the image the earliest tradition itself uses, it is not the lamp illuminating a room. It is a swift pair of messengers delivering a report to the commander of the fortress. Different image, different emphasis. Worth knowing which is which. There is one more layer to Chapter 2 that we have to address before we move to Chapter 3, because it concerns the actual technique that many modern practitioners have been taught. When Mahasi Sayadaw students learn to note rising, falling, and when they progress through the practice, they are often taught to expect specific stages of insight, a systematic map. First, one clearly perceives the arising and passing of mental and physical phenomena, a stage the tradition calls udayabhaya jhana, the knowledge of arising and passing. Then the arising becomes less prominent, and the passing becomes overwhelming. A stage called bhanga jnana, the knowledge of dissolution. Then, because the mind is now watching everything fall apart, there arises fear, then disgust, then a desire for deliverance, then a re-observation, then equanimity toward all formations. Then the mind is ready for the entry into the path, that map, that specific granular progression of insight stages, jhānas, is a beautiful and technically detailed piece of Buddhist psychology. And it is not from the 5 Nikayas. It is from the commentarial tradition. Specifically, it is systematized in a text called the Patisambhidamagga, elaborated in the Vimuttimagga, and canonized in its modern form by Buddhaghosa in the Visuddhimagga, around the year 430 of the Common Era. That is not the same as the Buddha's teaching in MN10. MN10 gives the formula: remain focused on the phenomenon of origination. Remain focused on the phenomenon of passing away. See in connection with causes. That is the canonical instruction. The detailed granular map of what you will encounter along the way. The fear, the disgust, the re-observation, the equanimity, is 5th century Buddhist commentarial psychology, brilliantly systematized by Buddhaghosa and transmitted through the modern Mahasi lineage. Both layers are valuable. They are not the same thing. And so, if you are practicing the noting technique, and you have been told that you will pass through these specific stages in this specific order, and you are wondering whether the Buddha himself taught this map, the honest answer is, he did not. He taught the formula. The map is Buddhaghosa, and the modern presentation of the map, with its emphasis on lay accessibility and momentary concentration, is Ledi, Mahasi, and the 20th century Burmese lineage. All 3 layers are visible in the practice you were taught, and distinguishing them, canonical from commentarial from modern, is part of what it means to see the tradition clearly, which is, itself, a small act of vipassana, seeing what is actually there, distinguishing one thing from another, not accepting the packaged whole as if it were all one seamless canonical teaching. This kind of seeing this kind of clarity about what the sources actually say, is a version, at the level of scholarship, of the very quality the tradition is asking us to develop at the level of experience. That is Chapter 2. Chapter 3 is where we ask the practical question. Given all of this, given the debate, given the layers, given the canonical images, given the modern movement and its brilliant lay-oriented techniques, what do we actually do on the cushion? Chapter 3. So, what do we do on the cushion? The question is not academic. Whatever the outcome of the Bodhisattva debate, however it eventually settles in the scholarly literature, if it ever does, there is still a mind that will sit down tonight, close its eyes, and try to practice. And that mind has to know how to hold what we have just laid out. Otherwise, the whole exercise is intellectual, and vipassana, by definition, is not intellectual. Let us return then to the sutta we ended Chapter 1 with. The Samadhi Sutta, AN 4.94. The 4 types of person. Because that sutta, read carefully, turns out to be the practical bridge across the whole debate. The Buddha, in that sutta, does not tell you which of the 2 positions is correct. He does not say Samatha comes first. He does not say vipassana comes first. He does not resolve the debate that Bodhi and Thanissaro have been having across their lifetimes. What he does is something more useful. He tells you how to diagnose your own practice, honestly, and how to respond to what you find. Look at your sitting. When you close your eyes and follow the breath, what do you have? Do you have calm, a settled mind, a body that gradually loosens and comes to rest, a steadiness that lets you stay with a single object for longer than 5 breaths without wandering? If yes, you have some samatha, some degree of cito samatha, some form of inner tranquility is available to you. The next question is, do you have insight? When phenomena arise inside that calm, when a thought comes, when a sensation arises, when a mood shifts, do you see the arising and passing as they happen? Do you see the conditioned nature of what arises? Or does the calm remain, but the arising simply comes and goes without you seeing it? If the calm is there, but the seeing is not, then in the Buddha's diagnostic, you are the first type of person. You have samatha, but you lack vipassana. And what the Buddha tells you to do is not to double down on the samatha. He tells you to seek a teacher who can show you the seeing. Ask them how phenomena are regarded. Ask them how phenomena are investigated. Ask them how they are seen with insight. Or the reverse. When you close your eyes, you cannot settle. The mind darts, but when you catch it darting, you clearly see the darting itself. You see it arise. You see it pass. You see the conditioning that produced it. You see the way the darting is not you, not yours, not what you are. And yet, you cannot get the mind to stop darting long enough to develop any depth of concentration. That would be the second type. You have some vipassana, some clear seeing, but you lack samatha. What the Buddha tells you to do is to seek a teacher who can help you steady the mind. Ask them how the mind is composed. Ask them how it is concentrated. Ask them how it is unified. If you have neither, a mind that neither settles nor sees, that goes around in circles of thought without either the calm to slow down or the clarity to catch itself, then, the Buddha says, you must make a great effort to develop both. Not one first, both. The urgency here is real, because the mind without either quality is, in the tradition's diagnostic, the mind of most people most of the time. This is not shameful. It is simply the starting condition. And it is the condition the practice is designed to work with. And if you have both, if you can settle deeply and see clearly, if the calm and the seeing are both available and both refining, then the Buddha says you are on the verge of what he calls unbinding, of nibbana. Not that you have arrived, that the mind is now equipped for what remains. Notice what this framework does. It sidesteps the debate. It does not require you to decide whether Thanissaro is right that jhana must come first, or whether Bodhi is right that the canon leaves the door open for an insight-led path. Either way, whichever of those two readings turns out to be correct, the practical instruction is the same. Look at your mind, name what is present, name what is missing, and develop what you lack. The Buddha in AN 4.94 is not adjudicating the scholarly debate that would arise 2,500 years later. He is giving you a tool that works regardless of how that debate is resolved. And here is where the whole catalogue we have been building starts to converge. If you have been watching these videos, you have already been in training for this diagnostic. When we made the video on saññā, on perception as a mirage, we were pointing you toward the seeing that catches the mirage in the act, that is vipassana training, the seeing of construction as construction. When we made the video on sankhara, on the body carrying conditioning beneath awareness, we were describing the terrain in which Vedana arises and the practice of Vedananupassana that watches Vedana at its point of arising. That is Vipassana training. When we made the video on Satipatthana and its distinction from MBSR, we were, in effect, laying out the canonical vehicle for Vipassana. That was the practice. We just hadn't yet named it by this name. Tonight is where the name arrives. And the name changes what you have been doing, in the sense that it clarifies what you have been doing. If you have been doing the practice this catalogue has been describing, noticing the arising and passing of thought, catching the mirage of perception before it hardens, watching Vedana before the story arrives, you have been practicing Vipassana, not in the modern Mahasi lineage sense of following a specific noting technique through specific systematized stages. In the deeper sense, the sense in which the canonical suttas use the word, seeing what arises as it arises, seeing what passes as it passes, seeing the conditioned nature of both. But, and this is the honest part, you have probably also been doing samatha along with it, and perhaps without noticing. Because when you sit and follow the breath for 20 minutes, and the shoulders drop, and the mind stops narrating so hard, and there is a settledness that was not there when you sat down, that settledness is samatha. It is not the deep jhanas that MN 36 describes, but it is on the same continuum, and it is doing something. It is calming the ground on which the seeing can happen. Thanissaro would say, that is exactly the point. Samatha and Vipassana are not two things. They are the two aspects of the practice that has been happening all along. Bodhi would say, the emphasis may be shifting one to the other in different phases of your sitting. Both readings survive the description. What matters, practically, on the cushion tonight, is that you know what to notice. You know that when the mind settles, that is one dimension. You know that when the arising and passing become visible, that is another. And you know that neither one alone is the whole. The lamp alone does not illuminate. The light without the lamp has nothing to burn from. What the canon describes, what the Kimska Sutta names the swift pair of messengers, is not two practices. It is a pair of qualities moving together. There is one more thing to say in chapter 3, and it concerns the practical question that many people who have done retreats will already be asking. If the modern Mahasi-derived technique, the noting method, the systematic progression through the jhānas, is built on a commentarial map rather than a canonical one, does that mean the technique is wrong? Should you stop doing it? Should you throw out what you learned at IMS, or Spirit Rock, or a Goenka retreat? The answer, honestly, is no. Not because the commentarial map is the same as the canonical formula, but because the commentarial map is a legitimate elaboration of the canonical formula, developed by careful practitioners over centuries. Buddhaghosa was not making things up. He was systematizing what practitioners had observed in themselves and each other over 400 years of practice after the Buddha. His map is empirical, in the sense that it reflects what many meditators actually reported experiencing. And the modern Burmese lineage refined the map further in a specific direction, toward lay accessibility, toward practice within ordinary life, toward a form of insight that does not require monastic isolation and 20 years of jhana development. That is not a betrayal of the tradition. It is a movement of the tradition. It is what living traditions do. They extend themselves into new conditions. They make themselves available to new practitioners. They solve new problems. The question is not whether the modern movement is legitimate. It clearly is. The question is whether we know which layer we are standing on when we do it. Whether we know that the noting is Mahasi's, that the map of stages is Buddhaghosa's, that the emphasis on momentary concentration is Ledi's, and that the canonical instruction underneath all of them is MN10, Han's formula of arising and passing seen in connection with causes. If we know that, if we can locate the practice we are doing inside the layered history of the tradition, then we can practice it without confusion, without confusing an extension of the tradition for the tradition itself, without confusing a modern presentation of a commentarial technique for what the Buddha actually said. That kind of clarity, that ability to say, this is where this comes from, and this is what it is doing, and this is why it works, is itself part of the practice. It is vipassana applied to the tradition, and it protects you from a very particular kind of confusion that arises when a practitioner mistakes one layer for another and then finds themselves, 20 years in, discovering that what they thought was the Buddha's teaching was actually a 5th century Sri Lankan commentator's brilliant elaboration of it. Both are valuable, they are not the same. Knowing which is part of what it means to walk this path with your eyes open, and that brings us to the close. The Buddha, in the Dhammapada, gives us 3 verses in sequence. 3 verses that, read together, close the debate and open the practice at the same time. Verse 372. There's no jhana for one with no discernment for one with no jhana, but one with both jhana and discernment. He's on the verge of unbinding. Verse 373. A monk with his mind at peace, going into an empty dwelling, clearly seeing the Dhamma aright. His delight is more than human. Verse 374. However it is, he touches the arising and passing of aggregates. He gains rapture and joy. That, for those who know it, is the deathless. 3 verses. 3 snapshots of the same practice. Peace and clear seeing. Concentration and discernment. Stillness and the arising and passing of aggregates. Not one, not the other. Both, moving together. The Kimsaka Sutta gave us the image. A swift pair of messengers delivering an accurate report to the commander of the fortress. Not one messenger before the other. A pair, arriving together, delivering the same report. That is the canonical picture of Samatha and Vipassana. Not a lamp illuminating a room. That image is beautiful, but it belongs to a later tradition. The canonical image is stranger and truer to what the practice actually feels like when it is working. 2 qualities, moving in tandem, bringing the accurate report of what is actually the case, right now, at the six senses, to the awareness that needs it. And this is where the video lands, not in the library, not in the scholarly debate between Bodhi and Thanissaro, not in the Burmese Vipassana movement or the commentarial map of jhānas. Those are the layers of the tradition. They are worth knowing. They are worth distinguishing. But they are not the practice itself. The practice itself is here. It is in this breath, the one arising in your chest right now as you watch. It is in this body, the sensations at the palms, at the seat, at the small muscles of the face. It is in this arising, whatever thought is forming, whatever mood is present, whatever perception is quietly assembling itself out of raw sensation. And it is in this passing, the way each of those things, if you look, is already dissolving into the next, not calm alone, and not insight alone, but both, in the half-second before the label hardens, in the quality of attention that is both still and seeing, in the place where what arises is seen for what it is, conditioned, impermanent, not mine, not myself, not what I am. If you have sat retreats, if you have followed the breath for years, if you have noted rising, falling through 10 silent days on a cushion in a Goenka hall, the practice was already here. If you have never sat a day of formal meditation in your life, and everything in this video is new, the practice is already here. It does not require the retreat. It does not require the technique. The technique is a scaffolding around what is always available. It is a way of arranging your attention so that what is already the case becomes visible. The scaffolding matters. The layers of the tradition matter. Knowing which layer is canonical, which is commentarial, which is modern, that matters because it protects you from a certain kind of confusion. But underneath all the scaffolding, and underneath the debate, and underneath the technique, the practice is the same. See what arises, see what passes, see the conditioned nature of both. Let the calm gather, let the seeing open, let them travel together, as the canonical image says, a swift pair arriving at the same time. There is nothing to postpone. There is no version of the practice that lives elsewhere and that you have to travel to reach. The practice is what happens when attention is placed accurately on what is already occurring. It has been here since before you were born. It will be here after you are gone. What is being asked of you is not to construct it. It is to notice it. The practice is here. It has always been here. The question is whether you're looking